Hello, dear friend. Thank you for hanging out with a couple of multiples today. We are your hosts, Drew
and Garden System. We are a married couple that both have dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
The reality of living with multiplicity is nothing like what you might see in the movies or on soap operas. This mental health condition often goes unnoticed, even by mental health professionals. Did you know that someone with DID spends an average of 6 to 12 years in the mental health system before receiving a correct diagnosis? This is because there is still a prevailing belief, even among clinicians, that DID is rare. The truth is that there are around 120 million people all over the world that meet the criteria according to the DSM-5.
We are glad that you are here to learn all about dissociative identity disorder. Whether you are someone living with multiplicity, a supporter, or a mental health professional, you are making a difference by choosing to listen to this podcast today. You can help dispel myths about DID and help spread awareness by sharing this podcast with a friend or loved one.
Please visit acoupleofmultiples.com and sign up for our mailing list to learn all about our private paid community called Hearts Multiplied on the Circle platform. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review. And for our Apple listeners, we would really appreciate you leaving us a written review.
Together, we can make a difference by taking the disorder out of dissociative identities. We are honored to have a Gold Plus sponsor for Season 2.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness is one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, founded and directed by Dr. Jamie Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Dr. Jamie is the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural, and since 2015, she's offered the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We have never felt more accepted and validated as a multiple than when we were able to show up authentically as Garden System for our basic EMDR training. Having lived experience is valued and respected in these training courses.
Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers.
Are you interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send an email to admin@acoupleofmultiples.com to request more information.
Welcome, dear friends, to another mesmerizing episode with Drew
and Garden System,
a couple of multiples.
The reality of dissociative identity disorder. Today, we are honored to have our Gold Plus sponsor as our guest speaker to tell us all about her upcoming memoir.
Dr. Jamie Marich, she, they, we, is the author of the popular Dissociation Made Simple, a stigma-free guide to embracing your dissociative mind and navigating life, 2023, now available as both a book and a clinical flipchart. She is the author of over 10 other books and manuals in the field of trauma, addiction recovery, and the expressive arts. They are an EMDR therapy trainer and founder of the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, one of the largest training organizations in North America that works to create an inclusive space for plural trainees and others with dissociative responses.
In 2019, the EMDR International Association awarded Jamie with their Advocacy Award for her work in destigmatizing dissociative disorders and other mental health concerns. Personally, Jamie Plus is known as the Unicorn System and is a longtime presenter at Healing Together. In October of 2024, her first full memoir comes out called You Lied to Me About God, focusing on her experiences with spiritual abuse and religious trauma. They are based in Akron, Ohio on Erie Nation Land.
Welcome, Jamie. We're so honored to have you here today.
We're honored to be here talking to good friends and hopefully having a good chat.
It's going to be great.
I'm so excited. We have quite a few questions for you today. First, could you tell us something you would like someone to know about you that is unaware of your work? And for those that already follow your work, what is one new thing you'd like them to know about since writing your new book?
Well, For people who are not familiar with our work, we are a plural system, yet one member of that system is this very professional superwoman part named Dr. Jamie Marich, and she's written and published 15 books and manuals. We've worked with several different publishers, and we're probably most known to this audience as the author of Dissociation Made Simple, although we've written a lot of other books on EMDR, trauma therapy. We are the owners and founders of the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, who's been a gold sponsor on this show. We're very happy with that. And
Yes,
we
thank you.
have been.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, our pleasure. And we've been doing EMDR training in some way, shape, or form for over a decade. Been a basic trainer for about a decade. And our doctoral dissertation was on EMDR therapy. And we've taught special topics before that. But to people who are familiar with my work, I think the topic of our discussion today is what I'm wanting people to learn more about. And that is my background with spiritual and religious trauma, which is, of course, born in our lived experience. Something I like to say about the new book project, You Lied to Me About God, is that in other books of mine, we've disclosed our dissociative identities. We've talked about kind of how and we've struggled, yet this book really answers the question why, or what's the source of a lot of these struggles. And for us, even though we experienced several different kinds of trauma, it was largely spiritual and religious in nature because we grew up in not one, but two different high demand Christian religions. So that's something that people who follow my work may not fully know about me yet.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. I think we'll definitely have some comments on that as we get into the questions. I think both of us also grew up in very high demand religious households. So lots to relate to, and, you've really been on this journey of authenticity and coming out in so many multiple ways in your past work with addiction, trauma, sexuality, and dissociation. So how have those experiences led you to write You Lied to Me About God?
Great question. So for us, our coming out, our vulnerability journey really has come out in layers or has happened in layers because I would say we were first out about being a person in recovery from addiction. That was something that we were very candid when we went to graduate school, inspired us to get into graduate work. So that's probably the longest we've been out about anything. And in terms of being out about being a dissociative system, we were diagnosed in 2004, and it was a gradual process of dipping our toes in the water through various projects where we would say things like, oh, we experienced a lot of complex trauma with dissociation, and then eventually fully came out in 2018. I still maintain that was the hardest coming out we had to do, was being very candid, especially with my professional peers, that, hey, we've heard you talk shit about dissociative systems, and we, this person that a lot of you respect, are a dissociative system. And we knew that we had to come out. We came out as bisexual in 2015 fully. We were out to people who mattered in our lives long before then, but the public coming out, which meant having come out to my family, happened in 2015. And this memoir, You Lied to Me About God, I guess it's the next layer of the coming out story, because in this book, we do detail what it was like coming out to our very conservative family. We've made a decision to be candid about a lot of our memories of our upbringing, which has been a risk, especially since we do have some semblance of relationship still with a lot of our family members. And because we know that whenever people speak out about Christianity, it tends to piss people off. And as I say in the preface to the memoir, to me, the stakes are too high not to at this point. So
exactly,
as a good friend of mine says, giddy up, here we go.
Yeah, that was something that really resonated with me, is that when you said, like, the stakes are too high, to not speak up. I agree with that.
Yeah, we really appreciate you writing this book because it's so relatable, and in order for it to be relatable, you revealed personal stuff so people can relate. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, thinking about my own upbringing, I grew up in the churches of Christ,
Okay.
and the churches of Christ are Oh, there's a whole spectrum of conservatism, even just within that brand name
Oh,
there.
sure. Mm-hmm.
And, the idea, like when you talked about, Sunday morning, you're at Sunday mass, and then right out the door and in the van to the Assemblies of God. And I'm like, yeah, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, like the doors are open, we are there. And it's a lot. By the time I was born, though, like our family was firmly Church of Christ at that point. Before I was born, Dad was atheist and Mom was, I don't know, all sorts of things. Like we have a whole sorts of interesting background in that one expressive arts thing that for the chapter, like, to do your genealogy roots and like drawing that out, like what religion Mom was, Dad was, his parents, her parents, and like going back up. And it's like, wow, what a tree of things that I have inherited there. So, yeah.
And so listeners are aware of how we got to this fusion experience. Our parents were Roman Catholic when they got married. They were both of Croatian, Eastern European ancestry. So most people from the country of Croatia are Catholic. And my grandparents and great-grandparents carried that to them. And then when I was about 5 years old, my father converted to the Assemblies of God, which is a charismatic evangelical group. And he went pretty hardcore with it, because I've met other people in the Assemblies of God who I still think were not as hardcore as he was in the 80s and 90s. Right. And yeah, as a 5-year-old, the oldest child, I was having to process, because that was right when I was really starting to be aware of just a lot of stuff that had been happening. And then all of a sudden, my dad wasn't coming to church with us anymore. And he was actively trying to convert my mother and talking badly about my grandparents and the rest of the family, because part of his evangelical doctrine that he subscribed to is that Catholics are not really Christians, that almost anybody else who's not evangelical is not really Christian, and they were going to hell and they had to be converted.
Yes,
and
this is Church of Christ.
That was, yeah. And that was a really confusing mixed message to grow up in, because my parents stayed married. They stayed married till my early 20s. And part of, yes, because there was the high demand religious messaging that I think a lot of us experience. It sounds like you both have had great experience, or not great, but big experiences with that.
Yes.
Big is the better word there. Yet I think what added to our layer of wounding was how we were fought over.
Right.
And consistently hearing messages from both parents in the vein of, I'm going to lose you yet. And I tell this story in the book, how we were 8 years old when we were asked for our opinion on religious doctrine on matters.
Wow.
And I think of that now, and that's just a horrible position to put a child in. And
absolutely,
I have some understanding of how my parents got the way they did. I do hope I write this memoir, even though I tell stories, I have compassion for them. And I think of what so many kids are asked to do in the name of religion, in the name of cults, in the name of spiritual groups that their parents are involved with. And it's just, to us, ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much pressure.
Yeah. I grew up going to an evangelical free church. This was because I lived in Utah Valley. And in Utah Valley, there was one church that wasn't a Mormon church. And that was the Evangelical Free Church. So that's the church my family ended up going to when we moved to Utah. In Montana and California, we tend to go to Baptist churches when we lived there. And that was before that. So, and my dad, this was my mom's choice of church. My dad grew up Catholic, and he converted to being an evangelical Christian when he married my mom. I think more so to prevent problems. My mom definitely wore the pants in the family, so I didn't get that pull tug thing that you experienced. But I did experience what it was like to be an evangelical Christian. And that was very difficult at times. I feel like it made me a perfectionist because I didn't want to go to hell. I feared going to hell. And
fire, hell, and brimstone, man.
Yeah, almost like
that was a looming threat for us. Yep.
Yes. And it almost had like a OCD effect on me. Like I was constantly asking for forgiveness for everything. Like I just was really scared, and that's a sad place to be.
It is. And that makes me, the quote that one of the first quotes I highlighted in your book was, like there's something wrong with a child that prays for the rapture,
Oh yeah. Well, and a little more context behind that quote. I mean, you could read the whole story of it in the book, yet the rapture of the church is, of course, this very evangelical doctrine that Jesus is going to come back one day like a random lightning storm and pick up his church and take them to heaven. Then there's all this other end times things that are going to happen. And yeah, it was 9 years old when we first actively started contemplating ending our life. You both know us, know that we have a part named 9. So make the connection. And self-injury started around 9. Actively ending our own life just felt like the better way to go. Yet, and maybe this is where the hellfire brimstone, I'll give it credit, was a bit of a protective factor, because we knew that if we unalived ourselves, we would go to hell. Like, that very uncompassionate message was just driven in. It's like, okay, well, we want to get out of here. We want to get out of here really badly. So what's the next? Let's just pray for the rapture of the church. And we remembered doing that every day before we went to school, where we were being pretty horribly bullied around that time. And it was like, please, Jesus, just take me away. Just take
Yes, I really resonate with that, because that's exactly what we used to do too. Except Church of Christ, there's no rapture. Jesus just comes and that's the end of it. Like, there's nothing else after that, But I used to pray like, Jesus just come, and like I even had this thought that like, okay, I used to pray as soon as I'm at the height of my belief, just take me, because I was so scared of, quote, losing my salvation. So I was literally convinced that the day I was baptized that I was going to die right at my baptism, because I couldn't possibly be in any higher belief than that moment, And that's like really messed up for kids.
And 9 is coming through here. She just wants listeners to know that she's really embarrassed that we were that way at one point, now that we all know better. And she also wants people to know that, because we know people of different religions may listen to your podcast. People of different religions are multiple or plural. So if this is part of your belief system, we certainly don't judge you for it. Just please be careful about putting your kids through it before they have agency, I guess, to decide for themselves.
Right. Yeah. Having that capacity. That is a question we're going to ask you in just a moment, but we got one more before that.
Yes. So
sure.
And you bring
we're
up
loving this.
Yeah, you bring up 9. So we're going to talk about that. So in what ways did the interfaith conflict within your family contribute to your own dissociation and development of dissociative identities?
We're just laughing because we did a podcast interview a few weeks ago with a person who's pretty well known in trauma therapy world, and they've interviewed us before on Dissociation Made Simple and all of this. And we were telling this story of our religious upbringing, and they're kind of jaw dropped. Like, how did you get through this? And I said, remember, we wrote a book on dissociation because we're a dissociative system.
Yes.
So, I mean, home was not a safe place for us emotionally, obviously, because my parents were so wrapped up in their own issues, which had a lot of this spiritual charge to it. And during that time that nine formed, what made it even more volatile is school wasn't safe for us either, because it's probably when we dealt with the brunt of our Catholic school bullying. And so that's definitely attributed to 9 forming. And what's interesting is that 4 formed right around the time that our dad converted or was actively contemplating converting. So 19 formed right around when we had this big blowout with our dad about really just the nature of existence and reality and being condemned to hell after somebody very dear to us passed away. And so, like, if you look at the trajectory of my parts forming, there's deeper trauma stories behind each. But it was definitely related to this subject matter in the book. And we're grateful for our dissociative system for keeping us alive through it. And we're grateful that they're still with us now. They've had a lot of therapy. We've all had a lot of therapy.
Right.
to be able to tell this story with some sense of perspective.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Being grateful for your parts, your others is so important. It just
Yeah, they develop to help us survive.
yes.
Our one self, Victoria, like that's where all of the religious Church of Christ, all the conservatism that we grew up with, like she carries all of that for our system, which most of us are very grateful for, because it's heavy. It's a heavy thing to carry, to have those hardcore, that hardcore doctrine, really put on you. Caused a lot of grief and strife, though, and had to do a lot of therapy. And most of the time it was Victoria that had to show up in therapy because, well, we got divorced, so we're going to hell now. I'm like, now what are we going to do? And then our own coming out journey, and then Church of Christ, like you cannot be homosexual, you cannot be bisexual, you cannot be any of those things.
Right.
And we were still a member and attending right up to marriage with Drew here.
Yeah.
And that was probably the most difficult thing that we had to go through, was literally doing that coming out. And, you talk about, the coming out with the dissociative identities as the hardest coming out. We were out talking about DID and all these things, but we could not talk about the fact that we're really a lesbian. And that was hard for us. 'Cause like you said in the book, you can't come out because you lose everything. And we did. We lost everything.
Yeah, I know y'all went through a hell of a time with that. No pun intended with the word hell. A heck of a time.
Yeah.
It's because I know in our story, both churches condemned same-sex relationships, homosexuality. I mean, I will say, even though the Catholic Church, rightfully so, has taken a lot of shit, and they are against same-sex, same-gender marriage, they are a softer, gentler church than the evangelicalism that I grew up in, because it's like heaven, hell. I always like to say at least Catholics believe in purgatory. There's some kind of middle ground where if you haven't blasphemed God, you've at least made it, and then your soul just may need cleaned up a little bit. But yeah, I will say both churches really, maybe this is too strong of a word, hated each other, yet they hated a lot of the same things, like a women's right to choose, autonomy, and being queer, being gay, and not just being... Because I will say the Catholic Church does have more tolerance, especially in the Pope Francis era, for admitting that there are gay people in our midst and they ought to be treated with dignity and they can be active members of the church, but just don't act on it. That's obviously where I struggle. Whereas in evangelical circles, it's very much like you got to pray it away. And we tried that never worked. And here we are, and just found that, and I do write about this in the book, that people who go through spiritual abuse or religious trauma end up in a variety of different places with God and spirituality, and that's to be expected. For us, we honestly never stop believing in God. We have always been wired for that God connection, that spiritual connection. We were fortunate to realize pretty early on that this was people doing this in God's name. This wasn't God doing this.
Right.
And the more we've been authentic about who we really are, the more we actually have loved God and the divine and been excited about our spiritual life. It just felt like a chore when we were pretending to be someone else.
Yeah, that's a really great way to describe it. It does feel like a chore. Yeah. Okay, so back to the kid thing. So like, with all these, like you said in the book, even though both your parents were, quote, Christian, it was two different faiths, two very different faiths, being Catholic versus being Assemblies of God, and really like any church, versus Church of Christ versus Baptist versus Methodist. Like they have such vast different teachings. So even if both parents identify as Christian, but they're of different congregations, that creates an interfaith, and so we know that, and especially, today, that many people are, basically growing up in these interfaith type of households, with these different histories. So what would you recommend to
Yeah.
other families raising children in an interfaith home?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, it could definitely be done well. And I had a lot of these conversations with my first husband because I write about in the book how he's Jewish and we never had children, but we were talking about having children. And we had a lot of these discussions. And something we did agree upon is that each partner's faith would be respected no matter what. And when I was doing some reading on interfaith families and preparing for our marriage, I read something very beautiful that why wouldn't I love the tradition that created this person I want to spend my life with? And I think if you can frame it that way, as opposed to I, partner A, am right and partner B is wrong, and I'm either just going to tolerate their presence or try to convert them, that's obviously a toxic dynamic that really rubs off on the children. I think to be able to come to each other's services or traditions, even if you're not fully participating, says a lot. And I get into this in the book. I don't believe we should force choice on children until they're old enough to make decisions for themselves.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And that might be one thing that I'm okay with when it comes to Church of Christ, is because they're very much you don't baptize young children. You need to be old enough to understand what you're doing. They do emphasize that piece, but I think of a lot of places like, kids getting baptized at extremely young ages, and they really don't have the developmental capacity to understand the decision they're making.
Yeah. Now, to that too, I will say, like in the Assemblies of God, they will baptize children as young as 8, 9, 10 years old because they will say that they've made the decision themselves. But can a minor child ever really make the decision themselves?
Right.
Especially before they've been exposed to other faiths.
Right.
So that's
it's all they know. That's all they know. They're just doing it, to belong, because that's everybody else in the youth group is getting baptized, and this is just what we do.
Pressure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, there is such a thing as spiritual peer pressure for sure.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. How do each of your dissociative identities connect back to God or other spirituality now?
Oh, that's a great question. These are all, I expected nothing less from you too, and all of you. Yeah, such a good questions. I mean, all of our parts in thinking of our system as form, all of our parts believe, all of our parts have spiritual connection. I mean, 9 most cynically and harshly will roll her eyes at the pretentiousness and the hypocrisy. And 9 has always been, especially since she's been through so much healing, is the one who really keeps us honest about just keep it simple. Like when we got involved at the yoga ashram we were at, and we write about that in the book too. Yeah, she benefited from some of that. And she understood that like our young part really liked it because it reminded her of a lot of what she liked about spirituality. 9 has always had that ability to just like keep things honest and real and simple for us. So yeah, I would say all of our parts. I mean, on one hand, we all have our own unique relationship with God or the divine. We all really connect to this idea of divine mother and God as feminine. We are not like some systems we've met where like one part's an atheist and one part's a believer. We can get it. We certainly have empathy for that because we know how systems can be and we know how polarizing faith can be. Yet for us, we're all pretty much on board. And I would say that's where we're at now in 2024 after having a good chunk of therapy for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Very good. And I do relate to that, because like I said, as we have Victoria that's got all the Church of Christ wrapped up, but then we have Maisie, and Maisie is probably the absolute opposite, who wants to dive into anything and everything that doesn't have to do with God. Like she was all like, when we stopped going to the church and after everything kind of fell out, she was like, that's it. We're never going to church anywhere ever again. We're going to become a witch. We're going to learn, like it just went this whole opposite, but she's always actually kind of carried that because she was, even when we were like, growing up as an adolescent, she was very much into things that would be considered, very taboo in the church,
Right. And I think systems that are like that are cool. There's a Gandhi quote I really like, which says, everyone holds a piece of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that about the larger collection of faith paths and spiritual paths out there. So for a system to tell me that everybody holds a piece of the truth makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what internal conflicts still exist between yourselves in regards to religion and spirituality?
That's another beautiful question.
Thank you.
I would say for us, nothing. Honestly, like if it was just us and the world, we're cool. We know who we are. We know who our divine is and how we connect with them. The biggest challenge is, of course, interacting with others, which includes our family.
Right.
Because our brother's a Catholic priest.
Right.
A very conservative one. We love our brother so much. He was a real big protective figure for us growing up.
Yeah.
And we also don't agree with a lot of what he does and what he believes. Yet we're super proud of him for pursuing his vocation, and we're there at any holy occasion he's presiding over. And sometimes we have some conflict over that, like, oh my gosh, this church that he's a part of doesn't really accept me and who I am and whatnot. So yeah, we could have conflict over those kind of things. And gosh, how do we function in an America where there's just so much Christian nationalism around?
Yes.
And are these people who I've interacted with as neighbors and just friendly interactions in the community, would they really want to send someone like me to the stake or a gas chamber? Like,
I know, right?
these kind of things can really gnaw on us. So that's where the conflict remains, is really how to best relate to and interact with others. I mean, I will say what does help, especially with people I care about, like my brother, and like what Nine said about the rapture. We truly believe anybody has a right to believe what is good and helpful for themselves and for others.
Right.
Where we draw the line is, or where we get is when you try to force your way of doing God on me.
Right. And I think that's really an important message to kind of emphasize here. We're not here to rag on religions, and we're not here to put down any spiritual beliefs at all. We're just here to recognize that this conflict of beliefs and what it can do to people when they're caught in the middle, what you can do to young children when it's not peaceful.
And that's very important to say, because whenever I teach on spiritual abuse or religious trauma, there's inevitably somebody who hears it as you're picking on Christianity. And
that couldn't be further from the truth if you actually read the book.
Yeah, and I recognize and I hear that it may feel that way for sure, because I remember what it was like being a very conservative Christian, being made to feel like I had to defend the faith at all costs. Right. In all contexts. Yeah, we've actually taken some shit for being very pro-religion in some of the more progressive circles we hang out in. And I don't think any religious group is immune to these things we're talking about. I mean, I know enough about other world faith traditions. As I said, I spent a lot of time at a yoga ashram and pretty deeply studied yoga and the traditions of Hinduism. And wherever you have anything spiritual and a power dynamic, problems can happen. And when human beings are in charge of shit, we all know that problems can happen. So,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you. I relate with you with the hardest thing is dealing with family, that like my mom thinks that I'm going to hell. That was the first thing she said was, you're going to hell, when I came out as a lesbian. And that hurts me deeply, because to me, that makes me feel like she thinks I'm a bad person. And in turn, for a long, long time in my early 20s, I thought that God thought I was a bad person. And then I couldn't be close to God anymore. And so it took me a long time to get to the place where I saw again that God is love, and that God does not hate me. And so, yeah, the people thing is hard when you feel like people, family members think you're going to hell or that they don't approve of you, and it's really difficult.
My father condemned me to hell when I came out to him in 2015. I mean, I knew that was what his theology suggested, yet to actually hear it was, I don't care how old you are, how much work you've done, that hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of my really good friends, and she's the only person that still talks to me to this day from the Church of Christ, but she was just crestfallen. And she goes, "But you're going to go to hell." And that was her reaction. And I remember driving home that night and just being devastated, the amount of pain. Like, there really were, I'm going to cry thinking about it, there really were no words for how awful I was feeling. And I had this experience driving home, and it was like almost like a dissociative experience, because I was driving the car and I was aware that I was driving a car, but I was not in the car driving the car. And, and it was like kind of like a vision kind of thing. And I was just sitting there with Jesus, and all he did was just listen while I basically poured my heart out, but without words, and then he just kind of asked me to follow him, and he showed me this beautiful place, and it was this beautiful nature place, this beautiful waterfall. And if anybody knows me, waterfalls are my thing. I love waterfalls. It's just this beautiful little slice of nature. And again, Jesus said nothing to me. This is just all things I'm seeing. And it's just like, I just had this sense of knowing of like, well, this is the place he's preparing for me. Like, this is my slice of heaven area or whatever. And then that was it. And it was just kind of like, no, Jesus does love me, and I'm not going to hell. He wouldn't be preparing a place in heaven for me if I was going to hell. And it just brought so much peace to my soul. Just to see that, just to know that. And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand, is that people in this world are going to condemn us and tell us we're going to hell and, all of these things. But at the end of the day, they don't get to decide anything.
And we've had similar moments where, like, we know without a doubt that God loves us, Jesus loves us just as we are, and we feel closer to them the more authentic we've been. I mean, you know this. And I think now when I hear people say things like that, I'm able to answer with, well, that's your opinion. That's your interpretation of scripture. There are many.
Yes.
But where we're at right now in our life is, if you truly believe that about me, I don't really want a relationship with you, because I feel you're entitled to your beliefs. And I've said this more boldly lately, that the fact that LGBTQ Christians exist, that we can still say we believe in God, or that we even believe in Christ, means that you can be a Christian without being a shithead. That was 9 coming through. To people who are queer, to people who are different. Because why would we still want to be connected to a spirituality that rejects us?
Right.
That's because that's the real essence of this, has nothing to do with those interpretations that people have said to us.
Right. That segues real great into our next question.
It does.
Yay.
How can someone know if their spiritual or religious environment could be considered abusive?
I mean, I think the first warning sign is if it's making you feel badly. If it's making you question your sanity, as opposed to filling you with nourishment. One of my spiritual teachers would always teach us this thing: is something nourishing you, or is it depleting you? And if it's depleting you, and that's pretty consistent, at very least, you're probably in something that's toxic and is not good for you. But if you're really carrying these beliefs about yourself, like I'm an abomination, or I'm a disappointment, I have to be perfect to please God, yeah, you've likely been subjected to some type of spiritual trauma in your situation.
So what would you recommend to others in terms of healing from religious trauma and or spiritual abuse?
think something that's helpful is if you can connect with other people who've experienced it too. And that might be hard to do if you're still kind of in an insulated church or community environment, but start listening for people who are maybe expressing some of the same doubts and questions you are. Like a story I tell in the book is I went to a very conservative Catholic graduate school, right? It's one of the top 5 most conservative Catholic graduate schools in the country. Yet the 2 women I bonded with the most in the program, I likely bonded with them because we had the same snark. We had the same sense of humor. And now one is a lesbian and has been married for many years, and the other one is just awesome. And we laugh hysterically about a lot of the things that we went through in the program together. So I think being able to connect with others is important. I think another big thing is read other pastors, other writers in your tradition than the ones that have been spoon-fed to you in your church. Something that was super helpful for us, especially with Christianity being, like, I will even say this, that growing up evangelical on that side of me and learning that Catholics were the enemy, being able to read some books about the Catholic perspective first were actually also very helpful when we were digging out of the evangelical side of stuff. We tell a story in the book about how an old classmate gifted us with a book called Surprised by Truth, which was a Catholic theologian defending a lot of the attacks that evangelicals lob against Catholics. And that was certainly helpful. And now that we certainly embrace some more queer affirming spirituality, being able to read other pastors who are affirming has also helped me to realize, like, even from way back when I read that Catholic book, that anybody can really interpret scripture through the lens of the way that they see the world. And doing other reading is what, and yeah, sometimes when I picked up those books, we'd still hear that voice of like, your daddy wouldn't like this. Daddy doesn't like a lot of things about us, and Daddy also subjected us to a lot of things that almost killed us. So we have a right to read other opinions and other perspectives. And I think reading those opinions and perspectives are important. And, you know, I'm obviously a fan of therapy. If you could find the right therapist who's the right fit. And just like we always talk about really finding a therapist who gets dissociation and understand that dissociation exists, it's important to me to find a therapist who, even if they didn't grow up religious and they don't fully get all of this, they're at least willing to learn and they're willing to meet you where you're at.
Yeah. Okay. Which of your own healing experiences impacted your internal experiences between your dissociative identities the most?
There's not just one. It's been a combination. I mean, part of it's been therapy. Another big part, though, has been connecting with other spiritual practices that we find nourishing and real. Like we've worked with shamans before. We've been privileged to be invited to sweat with some Native American folks, practice Reiki, which was something that was off limits in the church growing up.
Right.
Practice yoga. To us, expressive arts is another big way to be very spiritual. So it's really a combination.
I think the one that I really, I don't know if connected is the right word, but really kind of stuck out to me was the Camino walk.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the Camino is a pilgrimage route that runs through Spain. There's parts of it that go through France and Portugal as well. But it's considered a major pilgrimage site in the Catholic world. And as I write about in the book, even a lot of non-Catholics walk it. Sometimes it's walked on just for fitness and connection with other hikers who are on it. It really emerged in popularity again in the 90s, even though a lot of ancient folks walked the route. And yeah, it's a lot of story to tell. So for people who are interested, I'll probably defer to have you reading the full story in the book. Yet I will say we've always been a fan of going on pilgrimages. working for something, traveling. Like we made a pilgrimage to India in the years before the Camino. Even, my brother and I have teased that he's this Catholic priest, and I've been to all these holy sites in the Catholic world that he hasn't been. Like I've walked the Camino, I've been to Lourdes, worked in Medjugorje for a time. I've been to Fatima, been to Knock in Ireland. And yeah, there's something about traveling to a holy site that I think really connects me to those who came before me. And it's helped me to understand that my whole life has been a pilgrimage, because pilgrimage is something that a seeker walks to cross a threshold and learn something about themselves. And so, yeah, in the book, you'll learn about the various pilgrimages I've been on. We've been on, all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that one most intriguing. Walking, I think, is great. Also made me think of, when we did the EMDR training and Francine Shapiro and her discovering of EMDR by walking in the park and the bilateral
Taking a walk in the
simulation of
park, yep.
walking. And, I think that, I need to do a big walk like that, I think. So, so in chapter 4 of your book, you discuss a bit about purity culture, sexuality, kind of coming to terms with your own sexual experiences and responses. And you even titled it, "My Body is Built for Sex."
Yes.
And we experienced a lot of internal conflict around this. So part of it was like, yes, 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 yes. And then the other part of it was, whoa, 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 whoa. And as someone who has, survived the sexual abuse, and other people that survive sexual abuse, like there is this experience of this lie, the lie being almost very similar to what you said, but different, and so I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that impact of what purity culture is, and this idea could have for people with sexual abuse in their histories.
Yeah. And I do want to acknowledge that the title may be triggering. I think a lot of the book may be triggering, and I hope that I am clear about that in the preface. And if something doesn't work for you or doesn't connect with your experience, to notice the discomfort. Because even though we have survived sexual abuse and sexual assault, in reflecting on our story and our narrative, an even larger harm that purity culture and my parents' equal obsession with weight really gave us is that no one will ever want you.
Mm-hmm.
And sex is this bad thing that, again, the mixed messages were fierce.
Right.
And the line, "My body is built for sex," came from a friend / lover of mine named Luke, who you'll read about in the book, who was a friend of mine during college. And it was kind of a long, tortured story of we both liked each other, but were too insecure to say anything about it. And it wasn't until like literally 20 years later that we discovered how much we were attracted to each other. And I reflected on how my life would have been different if I knew that then. And if I would have been able to start unpacking the purity culture at the age of like 18, 19 when we met, as opposed to like almost a decade later when I started becoming sexually active. So, the chapter, for anybody who is approaching it, notice what the title brings up for you and your parts. And I will say for me, though, it's really about celebrating both my body and my sexuality as being divine and holy. Because so much of what purity culture teaches you is that the body and your natural sexual expressions are dirty and cannot be trusted.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a lot where the mixed messaging comes in, especially with the sexual abuse, especially from the young age, and the exercise, the expressive arts exercise at the end of the chapter. We started it and then we could not finish it. Like it was like, whoa, there was something there. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to talk about that one in therapy, but thinking about, trying to help reconcile that idea of, something my therapist says to me is the body is going to respond. The body will just
Right.
respond, whether or not, it was your choice or all those different things, and just thinking about how messed up, because so much sexual abuse sometimes occurs even within the context of
Yeah,
the church and religion.
absolutely. Yeah. And there's a great person I cite several times in the book named Emily Joy Allison, who wrote a book called Church 2 about purity culture. And from a theological perspective, she really sets up how this purity culture ethic just makes it ripe for predators to do their thing in. And yeah, the body's built for sex. Luke said that to me when I was 40 years old, 41 years old. And I think I write in the book, my body was 50 pounds heavier than when I was 18 when he first met me. And I just reflected on if I would have known that then.
Right.
Because of course I needed somebody to tell me. And
of course.
In any event. So
yeah, because we weren't really told the right things growing up.
Right. It's a fun story that I tell in full in the book.
Yes, I did thoroughly enjoy reading that story, and that was fun.
Oh,
that was fun.
It was a good one.
Yeah, it's fun, and I mean, and on one hand, it's a little bit of a bummer that like we never worked out in our adult life because we're too different, and I'm really glad we reconnected in our adult life because it was very reparative about a lot of what I was coming through at 18 or 19, where I had left my parents' house and everything was like, what the actual bleep in life? Because I was exposed to a whole other world of beliefs and kind people, but still feeling like we were this ugly duckling that was trying to navigate being out there in the world and learning that we could think for ourselves. And it was just so overwhelming. It was so overwhelming. And at 19, when we were kind of fresh out of our parents' house and in college, that's when we came out to ourselves. That's when we had that first conversation with, you like boys and girls. You like thinking about having sex with both boys and girls. That's a thing. And it's cool. And that's who we really are. But you cannot do anything with that because you'll lose everything you ever know.
The fear. Right. Know. Yeah, and I look back on my life, and growing up because it just wasn't an option, Right. And I did marry a man and had 4 children and went through that whole fiasco, but looking back, it was like I always was looking at the girls. I was never interested in the men, and like it was just kind of like oh, but like I didn't figure it out till I was basically in my 40s, late 30s.
Yeah, and I've guided a lot of people through this process, and having been through it myself, I've really had to look at do I like men or do I like them because I've been told I'm supposed to like them? And for us, it's really landed on, no, we like both pretty equally. I almost feel our life would be easier if it was one or the other. But I think it's worth looking at, and I would say to anybody who's listening, kind of going back to your question on how do you recover from this, to really do a good inventory on, is this what I believe truly, or is this what others have told me to believe?
Right. I think a lot of people, if they were presented lots of options as a young person, they would figure things out sooner, and it would prevent a lot of hurt and a lot of things that are
I think probably the most damaging thing is having to wear a mask.
Yeah.
And we have to wear masks to, be accepted into our families and communities. And that really just does such a disservice.
Preach.
Preach, yeah.
Preach it. Preach it.
All right. My favorite question is coming up. I can't be waiting for this one.
But before we continue, I want to kind of insert here. I really do appreciate that you put expressive art invitations in your book. Because I did quite a few of them as I was reading your book, and I found them really helpful. I really learned a lot about myself just from doing them, and I think other people could too.
Well, thank you for that. And one of the reasons we put an expressive arts exercise at the end of each chapter, 2 reasons. One, we're an expressive arts therapist, so everything we kind of see the world through is, how can we turn this into an expressive arts process?
Yeah.
Let's learn more about ourselves. And we have read a lot of memoir. over the years. And our favorite memoirs are always the ones that aren't just like a trauma dump of all the things that have happened, but getting us to think about and connect about our own story as we're reading the other person's story. And so we say it in the preface, we say it in the exercises. My biggest hope and probably my biggest motivation in even doing this memoir is if it can hopefully inspire you to look at your own spiritual autobiography, your own spiritual journey, because too often we're not invited to explore it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I mean, looking at the family tree thing that I did, like I didn't realize how much Catholicism was in my own background at first until I wrote it down. My father's family, my great grandfather came from Ukraine. And so they were, and when I looked at the paperwork, and I really need to do more research on this, but I realized that his wife and him, they followed there were two different churches. I forget the name, like the Greek Orthodox and then the Roman Catholic, maybe, I think were the two.
Yeah, Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. Yeah.
And I think it was, she was Greek and he was the Roman. And even back then there was already interfaith happening, with those two different views going on. And that, I forget where I was going with that, but I just,
that's part of the expressive arts,
discovering all the things, and realizing where everything came from. I think it's really eye-opening because you think, like I know a lot about my family history. I've done a lot of genealogy work, but when I actually wrote it on the paper and looked at it, like it just kind of made everything fall into place, seeing it on paper. So I love the expressive arts.
Yeah. Super cool. Okay, let's continue.
Okay.
In your opinion, what is the biggest lie being told about God today?
Is this your favorite question? That's my favorite question. That God is only one thing.
That's really good.
I like it.
That God can fit in a box that we call a church building.
Mm-hmm.
I get chills when I think about this. God is for us, God is absolutely everywhere and in everything. Mm-hmm. God can show up however they want.
Yes.
Right.
And we get, ourselves in a twist if, you're offending my faith expression or whatnot. It's like, who's to say God can't show up as a drag queen?
Right. In the most unlikely places, people.
Yes. So yeah, that's the biggest lie, that God is only one thing. And I think another lie is that God is anything but pure love.
Right. Absolutely. It makes me think back, when I look at the Bible, like Jesus didn't hang out in the temple with the Pharisees, like he didn't.
My first recovery sponsor, who was a devout Catholic, always used to say, I think the 12 disciples were the first AA meeting, personally. That always stuck with us.
Yeah, absolutely. God is anything and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So where can people purchase a copy of your new book coming out?
Literally wherever books are sold, it's on pre-order. So excellent. I don't judge you where you buy books. If you're an Amazon person, it's on Amazon. If you go to Penguin Random House, which is the distributor for my publisher, you can search You Lied to Me About God, and it'll show you all these different options for buying it. So if you want to buy from indie books, because they distribute, it would be in most mainline bookstores as well. So yeah, it's now on pre-order, and the official release is October 15th.
Excellent.
Yay. How can people connect with you or follow you?
So myname.com, jamiemarich.com is my most central website that links to all of my other projects like the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, which is our EMDR training company. And we also have a website called redefinetherapy.com, which is where all of our free resources live. So literally anything for free we've done online, we have on that website. We'll link this podcast there, other podcast interviews we've done. So that's redefinetherapy.com. And on all the socials, if you search our name, you'll find us. Our most fun handle, though, on TikTok is Trauma Therapist Rants.
My favorite one.
You can find us there.
Yeah, and your website's just got a new updo, didn't they?
We both got updos. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Redefine Therapy and jamiemarich.com. Yep. Thanks to Garrett, who is our amazing technical and artistic director. He's quite an ally to us in this work.
Lovely.
Awesome.
All right. So is there a last parting thought you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I just want to thank the two of you for being radically, authentically you. I don't think I've ever told you to this, so I may embarrass you. But at that risk,
Embarrass us.
I remember the first healing together when we saw you two holding hands. I'm like, oh, they're a couple? Oh my gosh, that's so perfect. I love that for them. Dr. Rachel, who you know, will always say, I love that for them in their journey. And I just really believe that being who you truly are in this world, whether that's as a plural, as a multiple, as a person who's out about your mental health struggles, as a queer person, is the greatest act of advocacy that you can do. So I want to thank you two for being you, being out, and for gifting this podcast to the world.
Thank you.
Aww.
Yeah, I remember I had a lot of fun holding your hand at that conference. Okay. I was happy. Okay. I still am.
Yay.
All right. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. We cannot wait to see your book hit the shelves.
Thank you for your support as always, Garden System. And thank you, Drew, as well.
And thank you, dear listeners, for hanging out with a trio of multiples today.
We are honored to have a Gold Plus sponsor for Season 2.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness is one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, founded and directed by Dr. Jamie Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Dr. Jamie is the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural, and since 2015, she's offered the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We have never felt more accepted and validated as a multiple than when we were able to show up authentically as Garden System for our basic EMDR training. Having lived experience is valued and respected in these training courses.
Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers.
Are you interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send an email to admin@acoupleofmultiples.com to request more information.
From your host, Drew
and Garden System,
thank you for listening to A Couple of Multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder. This podcast is intended for educational purposes and is not a replacement for therapy.
Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any guest speakers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear what you enjoyed the most.
You can visit our website at acoupleofmultiples.com for additional information, including how to join our new online paid community called Hearts Multiplied, to access additional resources, and to also subscribe to our mailing list to receive future updates.
Remember, you matter and are loved for being all of yous.